Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that's New Comic Book Day. And that was, for me, for many years in my life, cause of enthusiasm, cause of joy, because that's when new superhero comics come out. You go. It wasn't always Wednesday, but there's always one given day of the week where all of the new releases come out at the same time. And as I mentioned on this channel, on these Comic Book Wednesday videos, that is much less likely to happen these days. I don't find myself very interested in many monthly or weekly comic books from either Marvel or DC. I usually am more of a customer for reprint culture, for omnibus editions or reprint trade paperbacks or whatnot. And all of the releases for any given Wednesday are posted ahead of time online, so I often consult that, especially when, in a case like today, I'm both incredibly busy, which isn't usual for me, and when it's also hot here in Boston. It's 90 degrees Fahrenheit here in Boston, probably for the last time in a very long time. and that combined just made me reluctant to go to the comic shop unless there was a knockdown drag out winner. And if those inventories are correct, and I've had them not be, there wasn't. So I didn't go. I did errands, but I didn't go to the comic shop, and I thought that would mean that I wouldn't have anything comic related to talk to you about, but that turns out not to be true. There is a figure in comic books, in modern superhero comic books. Those of you who aren't familiar with comic books won't know this, but then you won't be watching this video, will you? And the comic book people will need no introduction to this name. And the name is Frank Miller, who's a writer and artist who did groundbreaking work on Daredevil, introduced the character of Elektra, and went on to produce an almost unbroken string of masterpieces, from his 4-issue miniseries Dark Knight Returns, about an older and more cynical Batman in a post-apocalyptic future, to the 300. His again, it was multi-issues, but then it was collected in an oblong hardcover about Thermopylae, about King Leonidas, and that was made into a movie. And so was Dark Knight Returns, has been lifted from and pilfered from for cartoons and movies ever since it came out, and influenced the whole of the comic book industry. And Miller's also done other things. He's done Sin City, for instance. And if you know those properties and a few of the other things he's done, you'll know right away that he has always been a little bit of a counterculture figure. He's always been, although I doubt that he has ever enunciated it this way to himself, he has always been counter to what we would now consider to be PC culture. Just completely counter to it. The kind of hunched over, haunted-eyed writer who will be at their most outspoken when they tell you that you don't have any right to tell them what to say. And I have always thought that makes his stuff, his stuff on a literary level is warmed over Raymond Chandler, but I've always thought that made his comics refreshing. And he has a new project, and I did not know about it, and it is what we're talking about in this Comic Book Wednesday, even though it's not a comic book, it's a book. It's a YA novel called Cursed that he is writing with Thomas Wheeler, but he is drawing it. He illustrates this. There's like 10 full-color pictures, paintings in here. Let me get you one of them so you can get a sense. And the book is absolutely suffused with black and white illustrations and also spot illustrations all throughout. It's not that he phoned in a couple of illustrations and has his name on the cover. In fact, the impression I get from reading this is that it's mostly him, and that Wheeler is just here to help with the prose, to help with the heavy lifting, to help with the polish. Maybe. I don't really know, though. This book, Cursed, actually confuses me just a bit. I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's a thumpingly good reading experience, but it doesn't read like a YA novel at all. There are some tenets of YA fiction that are kind of, sort of nodded at in the course of this book. There's a strong-willed female protagonist, and there's a sort of meet-cute, sparks-fly sexual tension relationship between her and a young mercenary named Arthur. This takes place in medieval Britain, and the protagonist is Nimue, who old-time Arthurian legend fans will know as the sorceress who uh, eventually ends up capturing Merlin, the magician Merlin, and entombing him in a tree. But it turns out in this book, she is sort of a prototypical Arthur. Let me read you a little bit about this. Nimue grew up an outcast. Her connection to dark magic made her something to be feared in her druid village, and that made her desperate to leave. That is, until red paladins slaughtered her entire village, and Nimue's fate was forever altered. Charged by her dying mother to reunite an ancient sword with a legendary sorcerer, Nimue is now her people's only hope. Her mission leaves little room for revenge, but the growing power within her can think of nothing else. Nimue teams up with a charming mercenary named Arthur and a refugee fae folk from across England. She wields a sword meant for the one true king and battles paladins and the armies of a corrupt ruler. She struggles to unite her people, avenge her family, and discover the truth about her destiny. And ordinarily, I would have a bit of impatience with Arthurian pastiche novels that seem on the surface to be so suffused with a kind of cheap gesture in the direction of the kind of girl power that is ubiquitous now in pop culture in 2019. I would ordinarily be a little chary of that. The one thing that enticed me to think, okay, maybe this will be different, is Frank Miller's presence. He is certainly not of that mind frame. And I don't know if it's him or Wheeler or both, but you don't get any of that here. This is one heck of a read. One heck of a read. Violent, unapologetically violent, and with characters who are etched instead of suggested by pop culture. I don't know an adult that wouldn't like this, especially if you like Arthurian pastiches. You have to read this. And this I think is out already. I'm not sure. Oh, I do. Wait, this does have a pub sheet in it. I think this is out. No, this comes out October 1st. And according to the publicity sheet, this is going to be made into a series in 2020 on TV. What is it going to be? I forget the exact details here, and I don't want to waste your time while I hunt around for them. But there's a major, like Hulu or Netflix or Amazon or something like that. This is going to be a series. But look at these Frank Miller's illustration style in these things. Look at how stylized it's become. How that is just wonderful. And that's all throughout here. You would think that, I went into it thinking, well, surely the painted artwork will be the main draw here, not the spot stuff. But the spot stuff is so incredible, such a masterful use of line and big block shadow. Just fantastic. And so by the end of the book, something that almost never happens in YA novels, especially YA fantasy novels that star a strong-willed young female protagonist, by the end of the book, I actually cared about the strong female protagonist. Go figure. So I actually do have a bit of comic book related stuff to talk to you about, because you're maybe going to see this in your bookstores. And maybe some comic book fans will notice Frank Miller's name on it. I get the impression from the introductions, from the various author forwards or whatever, that a lot of this was Frank Miller's idea, that he's always wanted to write an Arthurian thing. And it sounds from the ancillary material of the book, it sounds like this is the first in a series, and that if all goes well, Miller will continue to draw these things. That would be great, and I'm on board. And the truest test of Wheeler's writing, Miller's writing, whoever's doing the bulk of the writing here, the truest test that it succeeds is that after having read the first book, Nimue's Adventures, especially her, I mean, Arthur's in it, and so is Merlin, and so is Sir Gawain and whatnot. But the bad guys, first of all, King Uther, is an amazingly drawn character. And I don't think it was intended that he partially steal the book, but he does. But the main testament to the strength of the writing here is that I would gladly read the second book, even if it weren't illustrated. So that says a lot. This might have been carried on by Miller in the first book, but it's tremendously effective. So in addition to talking about Frank Miller, which is comic books, I also want to recommend you a book, which is me. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is sort of a cheat, but there weren't any comics that I saw today that I wanted to that I would want to talk to you about or hold out for you. If I can think of a comic related extra thing, I'll make an extra video on the weekend. That's always fun. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.